Malcolm Carter wiped his hands on his apron as he stood behind the counter of Carter's Market. At 40 years old, with deep brown skin, a salt and pepper beard, and kind but tired eyes, Malcolm carried the weight of both his father's dream and the struggles of his changing neighborhood. The store had been his life for as long as he could remember. His father, a proud black man with big dreams, had built it from the ground up, brick by brick, with the hope of giving the community a place to gather. But now, Malcolm felt like a stranger in his own shop. The familiar warmth of the old days seemed to have vanished, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. The bell above the door jingled, and Malcolm's heart gave a small leap. It wasn't the excitement it used to be. It was more like a habit, a flicker of hope he couldn't seem to extinguish. He glanced up to see Ms. Eloise Green stepping in. She moved slowly, her silver hair peeking out from beneath one of her famous church hats. A deep blue one today, with little white flowers stitched along the rim. "Good morning, Malcolm," she said, her voice as warm as fresh biscuits. "How's my favorite grocer today?" Malcolm's tired eyes softened. "Morning, Miss Eloise. You're looking sharp as always. That hat's a winner." She chuckled, the sound like a gentle hum. "Why, thank you, child. You know I can't step out looking anything less than my best." As she browsed the shelves, Malcolm leaned against the counter, watching her with a small smile. Ms. Eloise had been coming to the store since he was a boy. She was a living reminder of what this place used to be. Back then, kids ran up and down the aisles, neighbors laughed and caught up by the register, and his father stood tall, beaming with pride. But those days felt like a distant memory now. The door jingled again, and Malcolm's smile faded. A young couple walked in, their outfits crisp and expensive looking. The woman glanced around the store, her nose wrinkling slightly, while the man walked straight to the produce section. They didn't say hello, didn't even make eye contact with Malcolm. It was as if he wasn't there. Ms. Eloise noticed the change in Malcolm's expression. She placed a jar of honey on the counter and patted his hand. "Don't let them get to you, honey," she said softly. "Some folks just don't understand what this place means." Malcolm sighed. "It's not just them, Ms. Eloise. It's everything. Feels like the whole area is changing, and not for people like us." She tilted her head, her eyes full of empathy. "Change is hard, Malcolm. But this store? It's more than bricks and shelves. It's a piece of your father's heart, and it's a piece of this community's soul. Don't you forget that." He nodded, though her words didn't ease the tightness in his chest. As he rang up her items, the young couple approached the counter, their arms full of organic snacks and fancy bottled water. The man placed the items down without a word, his eyes flicking to his phone. The woman stared at Malcolm, her gaze lingering on his name tag, as if she was surprised he had a name at all. "How long have you been here?" she asked, her tone light, but laced with something Malcolm couldn't quite place. "My whole life," he replied evenly. "My father opened this store over 40 years ago." "Wow," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "That's impressive." Malcolm forced a polite smile and finished bagging their groceries. As they left, the door jingled again, the sound somehow sharper this time. He turned back to Ms. Eloise, who was watching him with a knowing look. "You're doing God's work, Malcolm," she said. "Don't let anyone make you feel small. This place matters. You matter." Her words stayed with him long after she left. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light through the store's front window, Malcolm stood alone behind the counter. He looked around at the shelves his father had built, the worn wooden floors that had seen decades of footsteps, the memories tucked into every corner. Maybe things were changing, but Malcolm wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. This store was more than just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of where he came from. And as long as he stood behind that counter, Carter's Market would keep its doors open for Ms. Eloise, for the community, and for the dream his father had started all those years ago. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the stillness of the evening. Malcolm looked up from the register and saw a wiry boy, no older than 12, slipping through the door. The boy wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big, its faded fabric swallowing his small frame. His cocoa brown skin glistened slightly under the fluorescent lights, and his large, nervous eyes darted around the store like a cornered rabbit. Malcolm narrowed his eyes slightly, but said nothing. Instead, he pretended to busy himself with stocking the counter, watching the boy from the corner of his eye. The kid hovered near the dairy section, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed a carton of milk and stuffed it into his hoodie. Malcolm sighed and walked around the counter. "Hey, kid," he called, his voice steady but firm. The boy froze mid-step, his thin shoulders tensing. Slowly, he turned to face Malcolm, his hands trembling at his sides. "You planning to pay for that?" Malcolm asked, nodding toward the bulge in the boy's hoodie. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, and his bottom lip quivered. I'm sorry," he stammered. "Please don't call the cops. I just—" Malcolm raised a hand to stop him. "Relax, kid. I'm not calling anyone. Come on, let's talk." He led the boy to the small office at the back of the store. The space was cramped, filled with old paperwork and a battered desk. Malcolm gestured for the boy to sit while he leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "What's your name?" Malcolm asked gently. "Jayden," the boy mumbled, staring at the floor. "All right, Jayden. Why'd you take the milk?" Jayden hesitated, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair. I didn't want to ask my mom for money," he admitted. "She's already stressed. And these kids at school keep messing with me. Calling me names, saying I don't belong. I just wanted something to drink for tomorrow. That's all." Malcolm's chest tightened as he listened. He saw the fear in Jayden's eyes, the kind that came from feeling powerless. It wasn't malice that had brought the boy here. It was desperation. "Listen," Malcolm said after a moment. "I get it. Times are tough. But stealing? That's not the way to handle it. You're better than that." Jayden nodded, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Malcolm crouched down, so he was at eye level with the boy. "I'll tell you what. Take the milk. No charge. But next time you come to me, all right? We'll figure something out together." Jayden looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Malcolm said with a small smile. "But you gotta promise me you'll stay out of trouble." "I promise," Jayden said quickly, his voice steady for the first time. As the boy left the store, clutching the carton of milk tightly, Malcolm watched him go with a mix of sadness and hope. He couldn't change the world overnight, but maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. One kid, one carton of milk at a time. The next morning, the bell jingled again, but this time it wasn't a customer. A woman strode into the store, her steps quick and determined. Malcolm looked up and immediately noticed her tired eyes. She was in her early 30s, with smooth dark skin and braids pulled into a neat bun. Her scrub suggested she was coming off a long shift. "Are you Malcolm?" she asked, her voice firm but polite. Malcolm nodded. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "I'm Anika Walker," she said, glancing around the store. I came to apologize for my son, Jayden. He told me what happened yesterday. I'm so sorry he tried to take that milk." Malcolm's face softened. "No need to apologize. He's a good kid. We all make mistakes." Anika's shoulders relaxed a little, but her eyes stayed wary. "He's not a bad boy," she said quickly. "We just moved here, and it's been hard. New school, new neighborhood. Everything's different. He's been struggling." Malcolm nodded, leaning on the counter. "He told me a little about that. Said he's been having a rough time at school. Kids can be cruel." Anika's lips pressed together, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. "I thought moving here would be better," she said quietly. "Better schools, better opportunities. But I worked double shifts just to keep us afloat. And Jayden, he's so smart, but she trailed off, shaking her head. "He's trying," Malcolm said gently. "And so are you. That's what matters." Anika met his eyes, and for the first time, her expression softened. "Thank you," she said, "for not calling the police, for giving him a chance." Malcolm smiled. "We've all needed a chance at some point." He paused, then added, "You know, if Jayden ever needs something to do after school, I could use an extra hand around here. Stocking shelves, sweeping up. Nothing too hard. It might keep him busy and out of trouble." Anika blinked, surprised. "You do that?" "Of course," Malcolm said. "He's a good kid, and this store could always use a little more life in it." A small, grateful smile spread across Anika's face. "Thank you. Really. I'll talk to him about it." As she left, Malcolm felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a while, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this little store could still be a place where people found not just groceries, but a little bit of community, too. It was late afternoon, and the sun poured through the front windows of Carter's Market, casting long shadows on the floor. Malcolm was at the register, counting change for a customer, when it happened. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, are you trying to rip me off?" Malcolm's head snapped up. A white woman in her 40s stood at the counter, holding a plastic bag of apples. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes narrowed. "These apples are way overpriced. I checked them at the supermarket down the street. You're charging way more." Malcolm's broad hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, the prices are marked on the shelf. I'm not trying to cheat anyone." The woman scoffed, loud enough for the few other customers to hear. "Well, it sure feels like it. Maybe I should report this place. People need to know they're being taken advantage of." Malcolm's jaw tightened. He felt the heat rise in his chest, anger mixing with the sting of humiliation. But he knew better than to argue. He'd seen too many situations like this spiral out of control. Instead, he took a slow breath and said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am. If you'd like, I can refund you." She huffed, grabbed her bag, and stormed out without another word. The bell jingled harshly as the door slammed shut. Malcolm stood there for a moment, his fists still clenched. He felt the eyes of the other customers on him, their silence louder than any words. He forced himself to relax, to breathe, but the ache in his chest stayed. That evening, after the store closed, Malcolm sat on the wooden bench outside the front door. The air was cool, the street quiet. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of work, and felt a wave of doubt wash over him. Ms. Eloise found him there. She walked up slowly, her church hat replaced by a simple scarf. She sat beside him, her presence a comfort. "What's on your mind, Malcolm?" she asked gently. He sighed, rubbing his hands together. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Ms. Eloise. Every day it feels like a fight. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough. This store, it's supposed to be a part of the community. But now, I'm not sure the community even wants it." Ms. Eloise reached over and patted his hand. "Malcolm, your father built this store during a time when black folks owning businesses wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. He didn't give up when times get hard, and neither should you." Malcolm looked at her, his eyes heavy with unshed tears. "I just don't know if it's worth it anymore. The humiliation, the disrespect. It's exhausting." "I know it is, child," she said softly. "But this store isn't just bricks and shelves. It's history. It's pride. And it's hope. You're carrying something bigger than yourself, Malcolm. Don't let anyone take that away from you." They sat in silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around them. Slowly, Malcolm felt the tightness in his chest ease. Ms. Eloise's words stayed with him, a reminder of the strength his father had passed down. Maybe it was worth it after all. Jayden Walker started working at Carter's Market the following Monday. He showed up after school, his oversized hoodie barely clinging to his wiry frame. He had a shy smile on his face as he stepped inside, clutching his school bag tightly. "You ready to work?" Malcolm asked, a warm grin spreading across his face. Jayden nodded. "Yes, sir." Malcolm showed him around the back room and handed him a broom. "We'll start simple," he said. "Sweep the floors and tidy up the shelves. Nothing too fancy." Jayden got to work quickly, his small hands gripping the broom handle with determination. As he moved through the aisles, Malcolm kept an eye on him from the counter. The boy worked hard, barely stopping for a break. When he did take a moment, Malcolm noticed something interesting. Jayden would pull out a scrap of paper and start sketching. Curious, Malcolm walked over. "What are you drawing there, Jayden?" Jayden looked up, startled. He hesitated before handing over the paper. It was a rough sketch of a superhero, all muscle and a cape flowing behind him. The lines were a little shaky, but the detail was impressive. "This is good," Malcolm said, studying the drawing. "You've got talent, kid. What's his name?" Jayden shrugged. "I don't know. I just like drawing superheroes." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "I notice all your heroes are white. Why's that?" Jayden's eyes widened, and he fumbled for an answer. "I guess that's just what heroes look like." Malcolm crouched down, so they were eye level. "You ever think about drawing a hero that looks like you?" he asked gently. "A hero with skin like yours? Someone kids like you can look up to?" Jayden blinked, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. I guess I never thought about it like that. Well, think about it, Malcolm said with a smile. You've got the talent. The world could use more heroes like that. Over the next few weeks, Jayden grew more comfortable at the store. He swept floors, stocked shelves, and even learned how to use the register. But during his breaks, he always found a quiet corner to draw. And little by little, his superheroes began to change. The capes stayed, but the faces began to look more like his own. One evening, as the store quieted down, Malcolm found Jayden sitting on a crate in the back, sketching again. This time, the hero on the page was a young black boy, his fists raised and a determined look on his face. That's what I'm talking about, Malcolm said, leaning against the doorframe. He's got power, just like you. Jayden beamed. You think so? I know so, Malcolm said firmly. You've got something special, Jayden. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't. Jayden looked down at his sketch, his face full of pride. Thanks, Mr. Carter. Malcolm sat down beside him. You know, my dad used to tell me stories about what it was like when he opened this place. Folks didn't think he'd make it. They tried to push him out. But he kept going, even when it felt like the world was against him. That's what heroes do. They stand tall, no matter what. Jayden nodded, his eyes shining. Like your dad was a real-life hero. He was, Malcolm said with a soft smile. And so are you. As they sat there, surrounded by shelves of canned goods and old memories, Malcolm felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Maybe the world was changing, but with kids like Jayden, there was still a reason to believe in a brighter future. Jayden's school day had started like any other. He kept his head low, hoping to get through the day unnoticed. But by lunchtime, trouble found him. A group of boys cornered him near the lockers, their smirks wide and cruel. Hey, Jayden, one of them sneered. What's up with your hair? Looks like you haven't washed it in weeks. Another boy laughed. Yeah, it's all wild and dirty. You trying to grow a bird's nest or something? Jayden's face burned. He wanted to shrink away, to disappear. But Malcolm's voice echoed in his head. Stand tall, Jayden. Don't let anyone make you feel small. He straightened his back and looked them in the eyes. There's nothing wrong with my hair, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Maybe you should stop worrying about me and look in the mirror. The boys' laughter stopped. One of them stepped closer, his face twisting in anger. What did you say? Before Jayden could respond, a teacher walked by. Instead of addressing the bullies, she frowned at Jayden. What's going on here? She asked, her tone sharp. They're making fun of me, Jayden said, trying to stay calm. The teacher sighed, shaking her head. Jayden, I've told you before not to cause trouble. Go back to class. Jayden's heart sank. The bullies snickered as they walked away, victorious. He felt small and powerless, his earlier courage fading fast. When Anika arrived at the school later that day, she was furious. How is my son the one in trouble when he's the one being bullied? She demanded, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. The principal offered her a rehearsed, hollow apology. We'll look into it, they said, avoiding her eyes. That evening, Jayden sat on a crate in the back of Carter's Market, his shoulders slumped. Malcolm found him there, staring at the floor. Rough day? Malcolm asked, sitting beside him. Jayden nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. They made fun of my hair again, said it was dirty and wild. And the teacher, she didn't even care. She just blamed me. Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. I'm sorry, kid. That's not fair. None of it is. Jayden wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Why do they hate me so much? They don't hate you, Jayden, Malcolm said softly. They're scared of anything different. People like that, they try to tear others down because they don't feel good about themselves. Jayden looked up, his eyes filled with doubt. But it hurts, Mr. Carter. It makes me feel small. Malcolm placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I know it does, and I wish I could take that pain away. But you know what? You're stronger than they'll ever be. Your hair, your skin, your talent, they're all part of who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you. Jayden sniffed, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You think so? I know so, Malcolm said firmly. When my dad opened his store, people tried to tear him down too. Told him he wouldn't last a year. But he stood tall, just like you can. You've got more strength in you than you realize, Jayden. Jayden nodded, his smile growing. Thanks, Mr. Carter. As they sat there, the hum of the store around them, Malcolm felt a deep sense of pride. Jayden was young, but he was learning to stand tall. And in that moment, Malcolm knew the boy would grow into a man who could face the world with strength and confidence. It was a quiet morning at Carter's Market when the developer walked in. He wore a sleek suit and carried an air of authority that seemed to fill the room. Malcolm didn't need to ask what he wanted. He already knew. I'll get straight to the point, the man said, his voice smooth. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial amount for this property. Enough to retire comfortably and start fresh somewhere else. Malcolm folded his arms across his chest. This isn't just a property, he said quietly. It's my father's legacy. The developer smiled, as if Malcolm's words were a minor inconvenience. I understand sentimentality, but let's be honest, it's just a store. Think about what you could do with the money. Before Malcolm could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A young boy rushed in, his hoodie pulled tight over his head. Mr. Carter, he called. Someone spray-painted the side of the building. Malcolm's stomach sank. He stepped outside and felt his heart drop. The words "sell" and "go back where you came from" were scrawled in bright red paint across the wall. His hands clenched into fists as he stared at the hateful message. Malcolm didn't answer. He just walked past the man and into the small office at the back of the store. He sat down heavily, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The walls felt smaller, the room dimmer. He put his head in his hands and let out a long, tired sigh. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. It was Ms. Eloise. She stepped in, her eyes full of concern. You all right, Malcolm? She asked gently. They want me to sell, Malcolm said, his voice barely above a whisper. And after what happened today, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Ms. Eloise pulled up a chair and sat across from him. I know it's hard, Malcolm, but don't let them win. This store is more than just a building. It's a symbol of what your father built, of what you've carried on. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Jayden stood in the doorway, his face serious. You're not really thinking about selling, are you? He asked, his voice small but firm. Malcolm looked at him, surprised. Jayden, I don't know. It's been a lot. Maybe it's time to let go. Jayden's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't back down. You told me not to let people shrink me. You said I had to stand tall. How can you tell me that and then give up? The words hit Malcolm like a punch to the chest. He stared at Jayden, the boy's courage shining through his fear. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. You're right, Malcolm said finally, his voice steady. I can't give up. Not on this store, not on this community, and not on you. Jayden smiled, the kind of smile that could light up a room. Good? Because we need you, Mr. Carter. We all do. As Jayden left the room, Ms. Eloise reached over and patted Malcolm's hand. Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of what we're fighting for, she said softly. Malcolm nodded, a spark of determination igniting in his chest. The store wasn't just a place to sell groceries. It was a home, a haven, a legacy, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The next day, Anika walked into the store with Jayden close behind. Malcolm noticed the spark in her eyes as she approached the counter. Malcolm, she said, her voice steady but warm. I've been thinking, this store means so much to everyone here. What if we did something to remind people of that? To bring the community together? Malcolm raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? A community event, Anika said. Something to celebrate the store's history. To show people why it matters. Malcolm hesitated, the weight of his doubts pressing on him. I don't know, Anika. What if no one shows up? What if it's just me standing there, looking foolish? Anika shook her head. People care more than you think, Malcolm. They just need a reason to come together. And this store? It's that reason. Jayden chimed in, his voice excited. I can help, Mr. Carter. I can make flyers. I've been practicing my drawing. Malcolm smiled at the boy's enthusiasm, but the worry lingered. All right, he said finally. Let's give it a shot. Over the next few days, the store buzzed with activity. Jayden worked tirelessly on the flyers, sketching an image of Malcolm as a superhero holding up the store with one hand. When he showed the finished drawing to Malcolm, the older man's throat tightened. The superhero wore an apron and had broad shoulders like Malcolm's, his face determined and proud. "This is incredible, Jayden," Malcolm said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really see me like this?" Jayden nodded, his face serious. "You're a hero, Mr. Carter. You don't let anything knock you down." Malcolm blinked back tears and placed a hand on Jayden's shoulder. "Thank you, kid. This means more to me than you know." The flyers went out, spreading through the locality like wildfire. Anika helped rally volunteers to set up tables and decorations, while Ms. Eloise made phone calls to longtime customers, urging them to come. The day of the event arrived, and Malcolm stood outside the store, his heart pounding. He looked at the banners, the tables filled with food and drinks, and the small stage set up near the entrance. Slowly, people began to arrive. Neighbors, old customers, even some new faces. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation. As Malcolm stood there, watching the crowd, Jayden ran up to him. "Look," the boy said, pointing to a group of kids gathered around his drawings. They were admiring the superhero Malcolm, their faces full of awe. "You did this, Jayden," Malcolm said, pride swelling in his chest. "You brought people together." Jayden grinned. "No, we all did. This is for you, Mr. Carter." Malcolm looked out at the crowd, at the faces smiling back at him. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope, real, solid hope. The store wasn't just a building. It was a place where people came together, a place where they found strength in each other. And no amount of money could ever buy that. The event at Carter's Market was in full swing. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sound of music and laughter. Longtime residents mingled with newer faces, their conversations buzzing with energy. For a moment, the differences that had divided the vicinity seemed to fade away. Anika stood near the stage, her smile bright as she addressed the crowd. "I want to thank all of you for being here today," she began. "This store isn't just a market. It's a piece of our history. And for my son, Jayden, it's been a place of hope." She glanced at Jayden, who stood nearby, his chest puffed out with pride. "Mr. Carter has done more than run a store," Anika continued. "He's shown us what it means to care for a community. He's given my son someone to look up to." The crowd erupted in applause, and Malcolm felt his cheeks grow warm. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but seeing the gratitude in Anika's eyes made it worth it. Next, Ms. Eloise took the stage, her voice steady and full of wisdom. "This store has been here through it all," she said. "Through good times and bad. It was one of the first Black-owned businesses in this area, built by a man who dared to dream big." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Malcolm, your father would be so proud of what you've done. You've kept his dream alive, and you've reminded all of us why this place matters." Tears pricked at Malcolm's eyes as the crowd clapped again. He stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. He gripped the microphone tightly, taking a deep breath before speaking. "This store, it's not just mine," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to all of you. My father started it to give this community a place to gather, to feel seen and valued. And even when times got tough, he never gave up." He scanned the crowd, seeing faces both familiar and new. "There were days when I thought about letting go," he admitted. "But standing here today, seeing all of you, I know this is where I'm meant to be. This store is about more than groceries. It's about us. It's about holding on to our roots and building something better together." The applause was thunderous, and Malcolm felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. As he stepped down from the stage, people approached him with kind words and handshakes. Conversations began to flow about the area, about race, about what it meant to belong. Not everyone agreed on everything, but for the first time in a long while, they were talking. And that, Malcolm realized, was the first step. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Malcolm stood outside the store with Jayden by his side. "You did good today, kid," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Jayden grinned up at him. "We all did, Mr. Carter. We all did." And for the first time in years, Malcolm felt a deep, unshakable sense of hope. Malcolm stood outside the store, paintbrush in hand, staring at the freshly painted sign above the door. The words "Carter's Corner" gleamed in bold, welcoming letters. Beneath it, a smaller tagline read, where history meets home. Jayden stood beside him, holding a paint can and grinning from ear to ear. "It looks perfect, Mr. Carter," he said, stepping back to admire their work. Malcolm smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "We did well, kid. Real good." After the community event, Malcolm had made the decision to keep the store. It wasn't just a market. It was a symbol of hope, a safe place for everyone who walked through its doors. Renaming it felt right, like a fresh start while honoring his father's legacy. Inside, Anika was busy organizing shelves, humming softly as she worked. Ms. Eloise sat near the counter, sipping a cup of tea and watching the bustle with a content smile. Jayden grabbed a broom and began sweeping the floor, pausing every so often to sketch in a small notebook he kept in his pocket. His sketches had become more confident, more colorful. They told stories of heroes who looked like him, strong, brave, and full of life. "Jayden," Malcolm called, nodding toward the notebook. "Let me see what you're working on." The boy hesitated, then handed it over. Malcolm flipped through the pages, his eyes widening at the vibrant drawings. One sketch showed a superhero standing tall, holding up a building that looked strikingly like Carter's Corner. "This is incredible," Malcolm said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got a real gift, Jayden. Don't ever stop." Jayden beamed. "Thanks, Mr. Carter. I was thinking maybe we could hang one of my drawings in the store, so people can see it when they come in." Malcolm nodded. "That's a great idea. Pick your choice, and we'll frame it." As the day went on, the store filled with familiar faces. Neighbors stopped by to see the new sign, to shop, and to chat. The air buzzed with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the emptiness Malcolm had felt just weeks ago. Anika approached Malcolm, her eyes shining. "You've done something amazing here," she said. "Jayden's thriving because of you. And this store? It's more than just a place to shop. It's a home for all of us." Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you all," he said. "This place is as much yours as it is mine." As evening fell, Malcolm stood outside the store, leaning against the doorframe. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the locality. Beside him stood Jayden, Anika, and Ms. Eloise, their faces lit with pride and contentment. "We did it," Malcolm said softly, mostly to himself. "You did it, Mr. Carter," Jayden corrected, his voice full of admiration. "You're the hero of this story." Malcolm chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "We're all heroes, kid. Every single one of us." And as he looked out at Carter's Corner, its new sign gleaming in the twilight, Malcolm felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, unshakable sense of purpose and pride.